is very foolish. I agree. Is to say, okay, yeah, be honest. Like if you want to, you realize there's a problem here. Like for example, we've become too dependent on China. The solution is to build up our own industries, and they say, okay, we're gonna have maybe there's going to be a 10-year project or 20-year project. We took a wrong turn decades ago. We're going to go on a new course because these are China made these decisions, strategic decisions. They actually did, identify critical industries 20, 30 years ago and began working on it. And we're just going to have to do the same. I mean, it's hard for us to do. We're very kind of allergic to planning, but the thing is, we can do it. We've done it in the past, and we could work
in the past.
Yeah,
I don't think
I know. I understand that we can't anymore, but there was an America that could have done it before.
Right.
Again, it's still
back
put a man on
everybody,
it's we could.
pre-World War II we were doing, right, when we were wearing high pants and talking fast, and then that's when things were getting done. But now it seems like, there's no way. We can't plan 1 year in the future or the next day in the future. They're doing a 20-30 plan. No.
Yeah, again, like I say, we just have a very corrupt system, when it comes to this.
Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the Democracy Street podcast. We're delighted today to be joined by Diana Bhutto, who's a Canadian-Palestinian lawyer, and having participated in the early stages of Israeli-Palestinian negotiations in the 1990s, she's an ideal authority to discuss what's been called the peace process. And in particular, given the context today, she's returned to the
First, thanks for having me back on. It's always a delight to see you. Okay, what is the plan called for? So, big picture is that the plan is kind of.
So at least I recognize the aspiration. It's very nice. It's fun. But the point is, if all of the millions of ifs that line up, if all the holes in the Swiss cheese line up, we don't get a state. We get the path to a state, right? So what do you make of all these caveats, and how seriously have we to take this thing?
So, so a few things. So first is this is why I was saying from the beginning, this is actually an Israeli package, an Israeli plan that was rebranded as being an American plan. You can tell from everything from the wording to all the guarantees that are provided to the Israelis. It really is an Israeli plan. But then second, it's so problematic because why is it that, one, Palestinians have to negotiate an end to their genocide? Two, they have to negotiate an end to the famine that's been imposed by Israel, created and imposed by Israel. And three, that in all of this, that Israel has a say in what the future, in what our future looks like. Why is it that any of these people have any say in what our future looks like? And that's why it's so problematic. And it's for this reason that you saw so much criticism around it. And again, it's for this reason that Hamas came forward and said, look, we can't, it's not for us to be deciding all of these layers. We it's only within our ability to determine this one issue, and that is the release
Not
of
sure what to
Israeli
get that
captives. That's
person
it.
that has
We
everything.
can't decide anything
Look at the
else
shower head.
because
Perfect
if
gift
we
for
do
anybody.
that, we're doing the exact same thing that Fatah did
A lack of food,
with us.
but they couldn't
And
test
so
it.
this is going to require consensus.
Sits up in her
so when
bed
they
and
responded,
continues to
their
gain
response
weight
was
on a
actually
new
very
diet that
clever one,
includes a special
in
porridge.
which they said,
Sham is one of
this is what's in our
181
court, this is what we
Palestinian
have within
children being
our
treated in
power,
Italy.
and that's it.
According to the UN, nearly 12.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the Israeli that this is drafted by the Israelis, as you say, is evident in the language itself. The very, very first thing is Gaza will be a de-radicalized terror-free, like that obsessive compulsive use of the word terror. That's Israel's signature. That's like the White House wouldn't actually come up with language like that. Nobody in the world would use the word terror so compulsively. other than the Israelis. So so we already know. So what do you make of the fact then that this, although this is branded as a Trump package, in fact, as we just said, the language, the caveats, all the prevarications, etc., built into it from the ground up are clearly Israeli. What do you make of the fact, in other words, that what is actually, for all intents and purposes, an Israeli plan is being presented to the world as under the brand of Trump? And we have to remember, by the way, just generally, Trump's whole thing in life is branding. That's like Trump hotels aren't actually run by Trump. It's got the Trump name. It's Trump is a brand. Why, I don't know, but anyway, that's what Trump is. So what do you make of that fact?
He's a narcissist, and the only way that it would get sign off is if it comes under his name. That's why there's been such a heavy push to have it be him and his name, and he be the one to present it. That's at least on the part of the Israelis. They know this. That's why they nominated him for the Nobel Prize. Put it in his name. Let him be the one. Let him be the one who gets all of the credit. And that's in fact why we're seeing what we're seeing right now in Sharm el-Sheikh, where he's the one. It's all about him being the person who's going to quote unquote secure this deal because he is the great negotiator. So it's all about his feeding his ego and feeding his narcissism. At the same time, we're dealing with a man who has a rap. That they will face the wrath of somebody like Trump. And so that's why you saw this come together very, very, very quickly, where he was pushing. And remember, the thing that he's been pushing for, by the way, he's not pushing for the full plan. He's pushing for part one. That's it. His attention span is part one. That's it. And part one so that he can so that he can get the Nobel Prize. And that's it. That's all he's looking for.
So in other words, part one, so that he can then say, having claimed that he stopped 7 wars, nobody knows what the wars are. Now he can say, I stopped 8 wars or 9 wars or whatever. Like he's going to probably inflate the number. But,
yeah, exactly. And he created them.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he certainly at least helped keep this one going for as long as possible. So, like,
and he bombed Iran.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. So, in other words, at face value, this looks like a trap. Obviously, just like Oslo looked like a trap. So then, is there anything to be salvaged? Like, are there silver linings or anything to be salvaged from it? Is there, why do you think Hamas agreed to it other than, as you said, the fear of the wrath of Trump? Although I don't see what more anybody could do to Gaza than what the Israelis have done for the past 2 years. I mean, full-blown, it doesn't get worse than full-blown genocide, basically. So what more was there to be done to these people that wasn't already done? I don't know in other words, I don't know what the threat was in that sense. But do you think that is it just a trap, or is it more complicated than that? And then we'll talk in a bit about, well, where do you think we're going to go from here? But just in general, do you think this is just a trap, or is it more to it? Is it more complicated than just a trap?
I think it's a little bit more complicated. Look, I have many, many, many friends in Gaza, and they just want it over. They just want the bombs to stop. They're hungry, they're tired, and all of them just kept saying, we just want this over. They're done. And when you ask the Arab states who have been supporting this, why they're supporting this, because you can explain forever just how many traps there are. Their position is, it's wonderful that you keep talking about all the obligations under the genocide convention. It's wonderful that you keep mentioning all this stuff, but nobody's doing anything. And you know what? They're right. They're right. The only people who've been doing things are us as humans. States are not doing anything. Nobody has definitively cut arms to Israel. Nobody has definitively cut trade ties with Israel. Nobody definitively pushed for Israel to be ousted from the UN or from any of these international bodies. It's taken 2 years of genocide where we've watched it. We've watched our babies being shredded, and nobody has done anything. And so these people in Gaza and these states are saying, we just want this over, and then we're going to keep pushing. Now, of course, the fear is that once you push it back to the bilateral, which is exactly what Israel wants, then the world turns a blind eye and starts having this fantasy about the two-state solution, which I wrote a piece just recently about it, called it the magic pill. They start having this fantasy again about the two-state solution. They turn a blind eye, and then it's like, oh, we just, you just have to accept Israel's quote unquote security concerns. You just have to accept Israel's quote unquote measures. And that's of course the fear. That's of course the fear. But for now, people just wanted the genocide to end. My fear, of course, is that this is just a repackaging of the genocide. It's going to be genocide repackaged, it's occupation repackaged. And this isn't a pathway to liberation, for Israel at least. It's a pathway to continued control. That said, I think there's another aspect to this, which we have to look at. The Israelis wanted to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Look at the polls. I live here. 82% were saying that they want to see Gaza completely ethnically cleansed. Israel didn't manage to do that. They didn't manage to do that. And people are happy now in Gaza. Like this morning, I woke up and kids were cheering and old people were cheering. Everybody was cheering in the streets because they're survivors. They've survived genocide. And that means something. There's a weight to that. There's a weight.
There's a great deal of weight to it. Okay, so wait, so there's at least 3 things we need to talk about. One is that if nothing else, stopping the bombing, although actually they killed somebody I saw in Khan Yunis. It's not like they didn't really stop the bombing. But at least, let's say, a general calming down or reduction in bombing. That in and of itself, at least for the time being, that's just a good thing because people can breathe. Hopefully they can get something to eat. Maybe aid will come in. Those are all obviously in the short term good things. They're not solutions, but they're at least they're palliatives. At least there's something. At least it's something for people there to hang on to on the ground. So that's one thing. So we have to recognize that, of course. And they're exhausted, as you said. People are exhausted. They're starving. They're broken. They have nothing left. The whole world has been destroyed around them. So at least we have to recognize that. The second thing is the fact that this is a continuation of control. So here we have 2 histories. One, of course, is the history of Oslo, which you're one of the authorities on, and you've written about it extensively, talked about it a lot too. Right, so the endless forestalling of it, perpetual deferral. It's like that's a classic Israeli thing, which we're all familiar with at this point. But more recently, if we look at the so-called ceasefire that the Israelis agreed to in Lebanon, what we see is, and I have a feeling some version of that is what's at play here too, in the sort of medium term, like even in the short term, right, where there's a ceasefire, but not really. Like, in other words, the Israelis agreed to ceasefire in Lebanon for almost a year ago now, but they haven't stopped. They bomb Lebanon almost every day. They blow up villages. They're still holding on to certain parts of southern Lebanon. They demolish this. They shoot people's livestock. They blow up houses. They do terror raids on refugee camps or whatever. They're constantly there. And it seems like that's also what we're going to be seeing here is one side ceases, the other side continues firing. So that's a second kind of element. The third element, and we'll talk about each of these things in turn. The third element is that for example, all of those European states just recently recognized something called the State of Palestine. But what that is obviously up for grabs. But at least they did that, and UEFA and FIFA were on the verge of maybe finally talking about suspending or expelling Israel from those world sporting competitions, which should have happened 75 years ago, but whatever. At least they were about to do it, and now it seems like finally, now we have a peace problem. We're back to Oslo. Happy days again. There's a two-state solution. This is the magic pill you're talking about. So let's break those things down and talk about each for a little bit. First of all, a summary of the situation on the ground in Gaza, because you're familiar with that too. You know people there. You know what's going on. Like what does Gaza look like right now? If in fact really the bombing actually stops, which is unlikely, but if, what's left? What is Gaza right now?
Okay, so the ceasefire technically went into effect at noon today. It's now almost 6 o'clock my time here. But then immediately after it went into effect, the Israelis clarified that no, it doesn't really go into effect at noon. We still have to ratify it with the cabinet. And so very shortly thereafter, they continued to bomb places, killing, I think it was 10 people during this period of so-called ceasefire. And so it's now almost 6 o'clock. The Israeli cabinet began meeting just under an hour ago. It's expected that they're going to agree to the terms of this agreement. And then by Monday, we're going to start seeing our people come home. Our people come home as well. One of the things that I've been thinking about for a long time is the more than 700 Palestinians' bodies that Trump made a big deal about the Israelis, the 28 Israeli bodies. Well, there's more than 760 Palestinian bodies, Palestinians who have not been able to bury their loved ones. And there's nothing in the agreement about that. So 1,700 plus 200. Button. This was the largest Palestinian. It was beautiful. It had some of the oldest churches. It had some of the oldest mosques. I don't know if they're still. I don't know what parts of them are still standing, if at all. There were, I think, 2 or maybe even 3 old British cemeteries. I don't know if the Israelis even bombed those. There were beautiful parks. Just these lovely spaces. Cultural centers, libraries, universities, all gone. All of them gone. Every last one of them.